Hi again. This is part three, and this is where, somewhere in the middle of part three, it's going to start getting really messy, because up to this point, it's really just been me and my note cards and my computer and lots of different books. Right, I've got the annotations, and I've got the scholarly edition, and I've got Cambridge Companions. Oh, and let's not forget, of course, I've got Richard Ellman's massive 800-page biography of James Joyce. So up to this point, it's been me and research and digging into the book. So around this time, I started having an idea of some things that we're going to do with the adaptation, and I've started to figure out. And again, this might seem backwards, like shouldn't this have come at the beginning? But it doesn't always. I've started to figure out really what appeals to me about the book. What is really the spine of the book that I've attached myself to? Because even though we call these things we call it a radical adaptation, I want it to be faithful. I want to bring it to the stage for the right reasons. I want to bring Joyce's intentions to the stage and not just my own. The point is not to pervert the work into something else. Well, so I was able to say at this time that the heart of the book for me anyways, that I wanted to bring to the stage was that what it really is about is a young person struggling with their beliefs and trying to decide what to do with their life. And that's a really very simple thing. You might think, especially if you haven't read the book, you might think that Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man is about a young artist being an artist. But in fact, he's not really an artist until the end of the book, until he makes the decision that that's what he's going to do. And the book is actually the process of him coming to that decision. And you see him from being a toddler all the way to being a young adult, and the things that happen along the way. So I had that spine. I had something of the idea of the universality. I had something idea of the fact that this is actually a really universal story. Certainly everyone can relate to being a young person struggling with what you believe and trying to decide what to do with your life. So one of the decisions I made early on was this thing that we were going to have a whole bunch of different actors, and the actors would be of various types. No two of them would be the same, and that all of them would play the main character, Stephen Dedalus, at one or more times in the play. So this was just a small form structure thing that I was resting on. So I knew we wanted to work around that. So now I've got my big stack of note cards. If you recall from part two, I've got a big stack of, I don't know, 100 note cards describing all the moments in the book. And then I went through the note cards and in a very crass way started to just ask, what are the moments that we have to show on stage? What are the moments I really want to show on stage? What are my favorite moments from the book for whatever reason? Because it's a beautiful image, or maybe it was just beautiful language. And so very, very quickly, that stack of 100 cards got narrowed down to, say, 60 or 70. So, I'm going to put about 60% of the book on stage. Of course, that's crazy. That'll change later. And so those moments were the ones that I approached to start scripting in some way, shape, or form. Just using a program coincidentally called Ulysses on my laptop. I went through the note cards with the book and research by my side and just started to turn those note cards into something vaguely resembling a scene. And so some of those pages that resulted, depending on what was in the book, look like a script, and there's dialogue and character names and all those sorts of things. Sometimes it would just be a description, sometimes it would be a notion, or just an inkling of idea of what I had in mind to turn that moment into something on stage. And of course, at this point, it's like an ugly baby, and some of it is good, most of it is bad. It's all unformed, and it screams all the time. Well, okay. So then I ended up with this like 140 page document that wasn't really a script, and it wasn't really in the right order, and I knew there was way too much of it, and a lot of it was very, very unclear. So one of the reasons that I really, really wanted to focus on moment work as part of the way of making this play. Moment work is one of those things that's difficult to describe unless you're doing it, but suffice to say, it's a method for creating work in the theater. For writing performance is one way of describing it, but it's a method that really enables you, empowers you, so when you need it, it forces you to focus on things other than the script. In moment work, you say that the script is not the primary motivator of what's going to happen, that in fact every element of the theater, whether you're talking about the lights or the costumes or the audience or things like vulnerability and risk and innocence, all of those elements are just as important as the words. And that's one of the things that I knew that this play really, really needed, was a way of taking Joyce's beautiful language and those beautiful ideas and including the beautiful language, yes, of course, but also finding some way to physicalize it, to physicalize the story and bring it to the stage in a more visceral way. I didn't want it to be like reading Joyce aloud for 90 minutes. I knew that. So then we got our cast together. And that's a process in and of itself, and you can ask the cast about that. All these practical matters and concerns come into play. At the same time, we were still trying to figure out exactly what we were doing with venues. We've had a very unusual solution to that, and so that affected the casting. But skip to the end, we eventually, at the end of September, right? Middle September, we eventually got a group of people in a room. We eventually got a group of 9 actors in the room between ages 17 and 67. And that night we talked about the book and we talked about what we were going to try to accomplish. And all I gave them was about a 40-page sampler of scenes from the play. And again, even in that sampler, there were things that seemed finished and things that were completely unfinished and things that were pretty good and things that were very, very, very bad. So even at the beginning of the process, you would say the script was only maybe 65, 70% done. And that was very much on purpose. I very much wanted the cast to have a big influence on what the play was going to become. I wanted us to figure out together how we were going to create the world of the play and tell the story. And also, we saved a lot of that work for the first couple weeks of rehearsal. That's normally the time when you would be reading a script and sitting around a table and digging in and talking about your characters and things like that. We instead were making many, many moments and doing lots of fun stuff and giving the actors lots of homework. Again, it's sort of a difficult thing to describe. But if you think of a moment in this moment work as a usually very, very short play, but it has its own beginning, middle, end. And it might be as short as a breath or a gesture, or it might be a 10-minute conversation. So we accumulated a lot of those moments. We learned to do that together. And the wonderful thing was that I was able to give the cast homework. I was able to give them, say I took a 20-page scene in the book and I whittled it down to 4 pages of text. I could give them the 4 pages of text and say, make a moment from this. And they would do it in different groups, or sometimes 9 people would do the same assignment. And so what they would bring back was something that represented really the essence of what was in those 4 pages. They had a way of whittling down to what was most important. Sometimes because we required them. We said, oh, you can only use 3 sentences or something like that. So maybe you'd have 3 groups that would each bring their own version. And then you can see what overlaps between the 3 groups, what they're in agreement on, what they are in disagreement on. They would bring new ways of thinking. And of course, right, it makes so much sense that having these 9 brains plus mine working on these problems was far, far more effective than just having my brain work on the problem. So everybody brought their own personalities and their own experience to it, and we started to see these scenes in totally different ways. And so a lot of the scenes that I had um, left unfinished, it was very purposeful, and it's because I knew we were waiting for this. I was waiting for them to show me how to do it. And so what they produced in that moment work, sometimes it was the scene they were working on. Sometimes, in fact, I was like a scavenger, and I took moments that they created for one purpose and put them over here in the play. And as we started to have a full draft of the script emerging, there were lots of aha moments, which was so much fun. As people said, "Oh, that's that thing that Dakota did the other day. Oh, that's so neat." And sometimes it was used as they intended, and sometimes not. And luckily, everybody was very generous with sharing their work as part of this process. I'll just give you one example. Here's my favorite example. This one's getting long. I apologize, but it was the messy part. There is a scene in the book where Stephen Dedalus is sitting on the steps of the library, and he's looking at the sky, and he's watching birds, and he's watching the birds so that they will give him a sign, some sort of indication of what he is meant to do with his life. And it's a beautiful scene in the book, and really, really important. And so the question is, how would you stage that? He's alone on stage. There aren't other characters with him. And it's all narration in the book. He talks to himself just a little bit, but it's all narration. So ways we might have done this in other plays, we might have had someone sitting next to him and said, "Oh, that person's the narrator, and that person will describe what's going on in this interaction." And that's fine. You might have him sitting there and just voicing his inner monologue, and that would be fine. Those are sort of the first two ways that you might go about it. We might have 6 people on stage, and they're all narrators, and they're all describing his inner monologue. That would be fine too. But I knew that there would be some more creative way of conveying what was going on. And and in fact, the cast did not disappoint. All of them brought in some interpretation of what was going on. Most of them were fairly short. And actually, that scene in the play I really like because it puts many of those ideas together. And even though it's just one actor playing that scene, you can see the work of the whole cast on stage in that 4-minute sequence. And it's far, far more interesting than to simply have somebody reading that narration aloud. It has far, far fewer words than it would have if I had just if somebody had been dumb enough to just let me turn it into a piece of writing. It's a much more interesting bit of performance, and I think it's a perfect example of what we were trying to do in turning this into a play. That's the end of part 3.